everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We'll be just giving one or a couple minutes for people to join us before we begin the session. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. All right, we can begin. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves and also for joining us today. My name is Fitre Galay. I'm a Senior Manager of Programs at the Resilient Cities Network, and I also coordinate our engagement work in Africa. I'm happy to be your host today and to welcome you to the first Cities on the Frontline session of 2025. Cities on the Frontline is a virtual thought leadership speaking series featuring solutions for cities. It began in 2020 through a partnership between the Resilient Cities Network and the World Bank's Group's City Resilience Program. The series provides city practitioners and the industries and cities they support with the platform for knowledge exchange. The purpose is of this speaking series is to have an open and honest learning conversation. We have over 600 registered participants on the call today. So to facilitate this discussion, we ask you to write your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. We also welcome you to keep introducing yourself in the chat. Please note the recordings of the session, as well as the summary and the presentation materials shared today will be posted online on our website. So today we are here to discuss a not so new phenomenon, cities and water. Cities have always lived with water, adapted to it in ways that have shaped their economies, culture, and of course their architecture. Be it to manage seasonal changes in water levels or to enable livelihoods that rely on marine ecosystems, urban communities across the globe have formed their own versions of what urbanism looks like. In Venice, Italy, entire communities have been built on stilts of floating platforms, integrating waterways as streets for transportation and trade. In Makoko, an informal settlement in Lagos built on stilts, a community of vibrant fishing community has thrived. In Xochimilco, Mexico City, old and vast water transport systems built by the Aztecs have been appropriated into a vast and festive tourism hub. However, in recent years, cities' relationships with water have been shifting. They are now faced with the twin challenges of exponential urbanization and more frequent climate-induced changes that are impacting and even changing the way they live with water. Sea level rise, storm surges, coastal erosion, heavy flooding are challenging the infrastructure of decades ago, while increased inflow of population on urban areas are straining resources and marine ecosystems. With nearly half of the cities in the Resilient Cities Network being coastal cities, climate resilience and evaluating and adapting the way in which cities live with water is a big question for us at the network. Although coastal cities have adapted by building higher flood barriers and dikes, these traditional responses are no longer keeping up with the demands of climate change and increased urbanization. So is there anything cities can do? Yes, actually, and we're here today to hear from a very unique panel that challenges traditional approaches and invites us to imagine a safe and sustainable world where we are able to be more adaptive to the changing nature of our cities and our water systems. These are bold and inspirational solutions that come from innovators that aim to future-proof our coastal cities and their built environment in these types of change, and they're creating proof points of what the future could look like for us. This session will explore the role of design at the center of the discussion on water and climate resilience and share with us inspirations from state-of-the-art thought leaders from the Netherlands that are helping imagine a positive and climate resilience future. With that, I'll hand over to our panelists and introduce our first panelist, Arnoud Molenaar, who is the Global Director of Resilience and Partnerships at the Square Floating Company. Arnoud was also the Chief Resilience Officer of Rotterdam and has contributed significantly to our resilience practice at the Resilient Cities Network. We're happy to have him back here today. Having left his role within city government, he has now embarked into the startup ecosystem and is working on the physical innovations that showcase how resilient floating infrastructure offers scalable climate resilient solutions, enabling cities to expand onto water sustainably. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Arnoud.
Thank you. And let me try to share my screen. Thanks again, Fitsum, for the kind introduction. Yes, you're true. I've been working quite a long time for the city of Rotterdam, and in that time already, I was promoting and facilitating floating solutions, you could say. And yeah, I made a shift to a startup because I really wanted to also help other cities and to share this knowledge and to find out and facilitate, well, help to how to especially, of course, coastal cities to make them more climate resilient and resilient in general. I cannot go to the next slide myself, but maybe somebody can do this for me. Yeah, thank you. So, of course, first of all, I think it's good to elaborate a little bit about why floating, because there's many possibilities to develop housing and real estate, etc., on land. We see actually a few main drivers, and the first one I think already mentioned by Fitsum is cities are expanding and they are growing rapidly. You could say 2050 the space that is needed by cities will be doubled. So there is a lack of space, and because of the growth of population, there is a urgent need for more housing. The second one, of course, obvious, also already mentioned, is climate change, and climate change goes with, for example, sea level rise. And sea level rise is accelerating. So the only thing that is certain is that it is accelerating and it is rising, but the rate of how fast it will go, that's quite uncertain. But even when we will achieve our Paris climate goals tomorrow, you could say, which I am afraid will not happen, sea level will keep on rising for at least a century. And the predictions are 1 meter, but also later after this century, it can even go to 3 meters or maybe 5 meters. So coastal cities, a lot of coastal cities will have to find answers. Third driver actually is, maybe we can switch to the following slide, is the shortage of sand, because some cities, coastal cities in certain regions, they have found a certain solution, and that is land reclamation by using sand. But we are actually had reached a momentum that the demand for sand is higher than the availability of sand, and that's also seen in the prices. And so this is becoming more and more complex, and floating is getting now more and more, you could say, cheaper compared to land reclamation. And next slide, please. But of course, looking from an, you could say, urban resilience perspective, there are several, you could say, drivers. So a floating infrastructure is, you could say, resilient from different angles, because, of course, it is able and capable to deal with sea level rise, also high tide, low tide situations. It can withstand, well, there's no impact of flooding, but it also can, the impact of, for example, droughts on the mainland, even earthquakes. And yeah, recently what happened in LA, you've seen the wildfires. A floating, you could say, community will face less impact, and so therefore is more resilient. But not only the floating infrastructure, the structure will be resilient. The city as a whole, so also you could say the mother city on mainland, will become more resilient because there's, well, more space. The floating structure is, of course, flexible. You can move it to the places where you could say the jobs are. It can function as a kind of a shelter area. What I'm going to present is built for a certain size of communities, say 110, 130 people, and that's exactly the optimal size regarding community resilience. And it even goes further. So floating, you could say, districts or cities can also switch to sea farming, and because growth of cities and populations we will need more food. It is as simple as that. Next slide, please. So this is you could say our vision, and instead of sacrificing nature or floodplains or very valuable farmland, we say we do have enough water, and we now have reached a momentum that we have the innovation and the designs that it is safe to live on water. And so far we start to talk about living with water, but we are already talking about living on water. And yeah, 70% of the earth is water, so there are huge opportunities here for coastal cities to use this space. Next slide, please. And of course, floating structures are not new. And they are applied in all over the world, but you could say relatively small scale. And so far, it is focusing on single houses or quite luxury villas. In Rotterdam, we have the floating office, which is already quite a size. But also in the Philippines, we know that there are examples, and also other places in the world, like Tokyo or Vancouver. Next slide, please. But this is now what we try to propose, and that's the next level. You could say a more high density way of housing on one floater. And after, you could say, well, 12 to 14 years of studying and engineering, we think as a startup now that we are ready to help cities to extend and their waterfront with, you could say, housing blocks or city blocks of this size. So, and each city block can be scaled up with more blocks, and so it is scalable and modular all the way up to, if that's an idea, the wish of the city, to a square kilometer where 30,000 people can live. But this is, you could say, the basic unit. The next slide, please. And yeah, some key features. Well, first of all, what I said, it is a modular design. And yeah, well, what we have been designing is also you could say, the superstructure. So what's on top of it, and that in this case is housing combined with some offices and shops. But of course, when a city says we do not want housing, we want a hotel, that's also possible. But this is what we have been designing, and what the offer is. And depending on whether it's Oslo or Dubai or Jakarta, you could say that it can be tailor-made also regarding the facades. Next slide, please. Um, so, and just to give you a little bit of feeling of about how this could look like, the whole idea is that one housing block has, of course, a courtyard, and which is a public area, and it will be a 5-minute city, as so to speak. So cars are allowed, but they can be parked in the floating structure. You could say there's enough space. So also all the utilities, the infrastructure, will be integrated in the floater, so to speak. And regarding, you could say, sustainability, well, we are quite close to being self-sufficient, but that's part of the ongoing development, of course. Next slide, please. And just also to show how we can help cities is by using a location scan. So we have a system with a model, you could say, with a lot of variables like water depth, maximum height, wave heights, but also the risk on flooding, the growth of the city, the political climate. There are a lot of variables, and we can select cities and then zoom in this case, for example, San Francisco Bay area, and plot in the floating structure to give a sense of size. And yeah, so and then we can have a dialogue city officials or developers or investors to find out the potential of this. Next slide, please. And I think that is my last slide already. Yeah, so just to summarize, we think this might be the next level of floating development, and it could be part of the solution for coastal cities that have a need for new houses, that have a shortage of land, you could say, and but also want to be innovative and yeah, and resilient, and climate resilient specific. So based on, again, more than a decade of research, and as soon as we have reached a certain scale on this innovation, that we also even have designed a factory ship that can go to the city that needs this. But that's well, it is part of our future plan, but it is already designed. But that's a matter of time, I think. Not sure if I've been talking within the 15 minutes, but um, this is it. So yeah, again, living with water to living on water.
Thank you so much, Arnoud, for sharing the opportunities that floating structures can present to live with and on waters. Really appreciate that. Everyone, please feel free to add any questions you may have on the presentation shared in the Q&A section. At the end of the next presentation, we've dedicated time for Q&A. And with that, I will hand over to Maria Stamati, Business Development Manager for urban planning from MVRDV. She'll be sharing more on the work one of the leading architecture and urban design firms in the world is doing to address the challenges of coastal environments. She'll present insights from the Sea Level Rise Catalogue, a resource that has helped cities explore a range of adaptive strategies, including floating solutions, elevated structures, and nature-based defenses to develop tailored responses to sea level rise. She will also share about the What If Netherlands 2100 project, which envisions nature-based solutions and adaptive urban planning for the Netherlands in the times of rising sea levels and demographic shifts. So I'll hand her over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much. Let me also share my screen. Then we can start. I think you can see, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction, Fitzum. What I would like to do is I would like to take you through a journey a bit to understand how MVRDV as a urban planning and architecture firm has tried to address these constant changes that we are facing. Our motto has always been that we want to create social, innovative, but also realistic, green, and remarkable architecture and urbanism for a world that is changing around us. And through our projects, what we're aiming is to show our DNA, the office DNA in the design, and how we are facing the future of the planet. While at the same time, around us, we see changes dramatically, and we see the consequences of our actions drastically in the last 2 years through climate change impacts. We can have, though, a positive impact. We need to stay curious, be inspired, and dream about what the possibilities can be and work together to realize them. And we need to ask ourselves, how do we imagine the future city could look like? And above all, what is our bucket list as designers, thinkers, and innovators for the planet? In MVRDV, we believe that we have the knowledge is out there, but we need to act. And this only works if we bring everyone on the table and apply our knowledge so we can together co-create these future cities that we're imagining. And in the next slides, I will try to share examples of the projects that aim to create this kind of future approach to the city. Starting indeed with the Sea Level Rise Catalogue, where MVRDV is part of a team named the North Creek Collective and has presented a series of proposals for the city of Vancouver to adapt waterfront buildings, landscape, and infrastructure, and to accommodate in rising sea levels. Sea level rise, we know, is a global challenge, and many thriving cities are located on the waterside. And so climate change-induced rise in sea level, combined with increases of weather events, we see that it threatens the cities globally. Typical responses to these challenges have been to resist the water with higher flood barriers and dikes. However, such approaches often worsen the flooding in the cities. So what if cities learn to work with the water rather than against it? With that premise in mind, we created a set of adaptation pathways that focuses on living with the water rather than resisting it in order to stay resilient. In tackling the next century for Falls Creek, we looked closely at the context of Vancouver, tried to imagine what the shoreline zoning in the future could look like. We took into consideration everything from types of buildings already we found there, but as well community values of the city and the local First Nations as Musqueam and Squamish, for whom this is an important site of the city. With our approach, we offer ideas that can also be adapted to new contexts elsewhere. With through the Sea Level Rise Catalogue, Vancouver can also become a global leader, showing other cities around the world a way into the future. The Sea Level Rise Catalogue offers examples for both adapting existing buildings and areas, but also developing new structure with sea level rise in mind. Ideas for the new construction include floating habitat islands, adaptive houses, offices, sport facilities, and cultural spaces as well. We looked also into mixed-use high-rises and small neighborhoods in stilts, as well as inland developments that bolsters the city flood resilience. It includes also vertical expansion of flood adaptive townhouses with community terraces, as well as mid-rises striped back to their structural skeletons in order to accommodate flexible programs, and high-rise buildings serving from housing up to mobility hubs to connect land and water-based transportation. So where do we start? We started by creating a rewilding vision for the larger system of Falls Creek waterfront, but as well as offering concrete futures for 2 pilot sites and a series of transition stages to get there. I'm going to start with the site of Between Bridges, an area in Vancouver's Falls Creek South neighborhood situated between the bridges of Burrard and Cambie Street, with a community that is known for its vibrant residential spaces. Using the principle of the catalogue, the Between Bridges site becomes a place where urban life with water life can overlap and thrive together. And we try also to improve these connections with the rest of the city. In the in-between bridges area, we tested pilot projects such as a First Nations pavilion that provides education on Indigenous land stewardship practices, as well as a mini forest where we wanted to add greenery to the site, and a paddler's pavilion that allows people to enjoy the water. Our second site was Cooper's Park, which is an already scenic urban park and a popular spot for walking and jogging and cycling, and it connects Vancouver's iconic waterfront pathway. By introducing first changes already, what can happen tomorrow is that we can already see a positive impact to make the park more equitable and accessible, sustainable and livable, but also address the ability to respond to the sea level rise. And by 2100, the Cooper's Park site is transformed into a tidal garden in which adaptive buildings and public pavilion for activities, for mobility, looking as well into the biodiversity respect and support the restoration of the natural waterfront is created. Here, the pilot projects include a water mobility hub and to enable water transport, but as well floating First Nation restaurant and a floating walkway that begins the expansion of the park into the water. So what can be done to allow these areas to dramatically expand and form a more natural transition between sea and land? In return, can the city expand to make this kind of symbiotic life between water and the urban culture? We believe that the traditional approach to the urban waterfronts, which revolve around resisting the water with hard infrastructure, are no longer effective. The proposals that we saw here center on allowing the city to coexist with the water. We believe that we need to redesign the coastline by giving space to the water. And when combined, the long-term visions that we created for the North Creek Collective and the Sea Level Rise Catalogue could serve not only to reimagine the Vancouver's relationship to its waterfront, but also to provide a guide to other coastal cities all over the world, showing how to move towards an adaptive, resilient, and sustainable future. Similarly to the work that we did for Vancouver, the Netherlands has always been a country that deals with this improbable situation where much of the area that now makes up the country was once marshland or even under the sea. But what happens when these type of conditions meet challenges such as climate change? And this is the question that was tackled in the What If Nederland 2100, in which MVRDV investigating the difficult decisions that the country could take and is likely to face in the coming century. What we did for this studies, we developed, first of all, a decision matrix, a kind of mixing deck for the future scenarios. It introduced basically sliding scales of a variety of spatial and planning consideration, from the severity of global warming up to the population growth, as well as the approach to dealing with the sea level rise. This decision matrix helps to define a storyline and define the parameters of each scenario studied in this report. There was a point during the study where a conscious decision was made to investigate the extreme scenario, the maximum predicted global warming and the maximum predicted population growth. These scenarios would likely also necessitate a change in the approach of dealing with water. So we also made the assumption that in the future, the Dutch society will stop fighting the sea, and instead of manufacturing the landscape to suit the lifestyle of the people living in the Netherlands, our lifestyle should adapt to suit the landscape itself. The extreme rise in sea levels, combined with this new approach to the water, will mean that the low-lying western parts of Netherlands, which are today the area of the country's largest cities, and the majority of the population lives in, will no longer be protected from the sea, and the country will be divided between the waterlogged cities in the west and the higher and drier sand cities in the east. The sand cities specifically are built on higher and sandy soils and expanded significantly after the Second World War with large industrial parks and post-war expansions. And they will become hyperdense with all land uses turned into high intensity. In contrast with the current situation, these cities will be hosting most of the housing and the majority of the population growth as well as the economic activities. The residential areas will be developed to maximum density, where even agriculture can be stacked on vertical farms, and the green belts around the cities will provide this buffer zone for rainwater production and for nature expansion. On the other hand, the waterlogged cities on the west of the Netherlands, which are built on lowlands and clay soils, will require and at the moment require quite extensive water management, will transition into open and that transition into, we also have a lot of open agricultural landscape on the edges. They will take a totally different path. In order to protect the important heritage buildings, the historic center of these cities, for example, Amsterdam, will be encircled by raised dikes. But outside these dikes, the neighborhoods that developed in the post-war period will adapt to a new life, living in harmony with water. Ground floors will be emptied out, and with rooftop extensions compensating for the flooding housing, we will create a new ground level network of walkways to connect through the buildings. Beyond this neighborhood, in place of this traditional agricultural edge that we have right now, the production of agriculture and either bio-based material will become the dominant land use alongside large swatches of natural delta landscape. And getting around with boats and other forms of small-scale transport will become the norm. These waterlogged cities will be the pioneers of resilience and adaptability for the Netherlands and will be in tune with nature. To sum up a bit what I tried to communicate in this presentation is mostly the idea that of what is possible. It might seem hard to imagine right now, but we could live in a flooded landscape if we have to. What we can do is continue with the current status quo, building in ways that are not flexible, not sustainable, and not resilient. So we think that we should really try to change the way we think about the world and the way that we design. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria, for an excellent presentation and a vast number of case studies and examples that you shared with us. Again, if there are any questions for Maria, please add it in the Q&A session. I think before we move to the Q&A session, we'll have a brief poll that should come up now. I'm hoping everyone can see a poll on their screen. And this is just a brief question for you, the audience, asking you what are the most critical approaches for building climate resilient coastal cities? Is it investing in floating and adaptive infrastructure, strengthening nature-based coastal protection, as was shared before, implementing stricter land use and zoning policies with what is existing, or enhancing community engagement and preparedness? Please let us know your answers. But in the meantime, Maria and Arnoud, if you have any reflections on this poll question, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, so maybe I can jump in. What we have find out so far already is that, especially you could say land use restrictions, but also zoning policies and regulations regarding well, especially the water, that's new compared to what is happening on the land. And so that's really something that is specifically and different from city to city. And so I think technically a lot of things already can be done and built and designed, but still we are not used to work on plots that are on the water. Yeah. And so I think to a certain level, the regulations and legislation has still is under development, but I think that's a matter of time.
Wonderful. And there are already questions for you, Arnaud, in the Q&A around that, like the policies and the land use practices that are needed to enable these. Maria, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I agree, of course, with Arnold, but I also think one very important point to make is the community engagement and preparedness. And it's also very different in different parts of the world, and it's something that we also have to face as well as designers, that these are quite difficult topics sometimes to discuss with communities when having different types of information or different even political views. And it's also sometimes very hard to change the point of view from a dystopian future that is hard to discuss to more open up to the possibility and learn how we can live together in these conditions rather than trying to stay out of this approach at all, and see how we can work together with the water and living on it or with it. I think this is all elements that we should try to bring more and more forward in community engagement.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think we can look at the results. Strengthening nature-based solutions and coastal protection got a big vote, although I did see in the chat someone saying all of the above, which I think all of us agree with. So with the next 20 minutes, we can move to the Q&A section, which has been very active. So that's very exciting. So what we'll be doing is compiling a number of questions together because there are some similar overlaps. Most of the questions are regarding floating structures. So Arnaud and also Maria, please feel free to chime in from your experiences on that. One of the first, many questions actually was around what it would look like to provide basic services in scaled floating structure. So from waste management, energy to water services, how do you integrate that into this new vision of planning? Arnaud, I can hand to you, and then Maria, also please feel free to come in with thoughts from your experiences.
Oh, thanks. First of all, for all the questions, and they're really good. I even do not know all the answers, but I will let's see how far we get, and let's see how we can also continue the conversation after this webinar. That would be also great, of course. Because regarding the integration of, you could say, the utilities, the short answer is technically everything is possible, but it depends, of course, on the local situation but also the budget. But for example, the sewer treatment that will be done, preferably, of course, is technically also possible on the housing block itself. The floating structure will have this in-house, you could say, and that is also already a proven concept. You could say the floating pavilion in Rotterdam has experiences with that. And regarding, for example, energy and heat, that can be generated by the water on which the city block is floating. And that combined with solar panels, maybe even you could say windmills, but that's something that is also, of course, depending on the specific location and wind conditions, etc. But we also strongly believe the more integrated it can be, and the more self-sufficient, the better. But obviously, it is the case that there is always a little bit, you could say, a strength between affordability and sustainability. Yeah? So the more sustainable it will, there is a price. And that's but it depends again on the place. Everything is possible, and preferably we will do it as sustainable as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Arnold. I think it's very good point that indeed everything is possible, and it's also good to consider that the whole infrastructural system is updating all the time, and it's also becoming more and more sustainable. So it's also a try to reuse as much as possible. So we should also try to consider that it's not only the structures that they are involving, but also the systems within the structures that evolving with them. And the more that we try to have this kind of flexible approach in design, reusable energy, reusable water systems, water collection, all these can be part of an infrastructure that helps supporting this type of designs from floating structures, living with the water, living in floatable landscapes. So all these are part of the same concept that can work together.
Excellent. Thank you both. I think the second question also applies to both of you. There have been a number of questions around what are the materials of these future-proofed innovations, be it the floating structures or the other ones that Maria, you have shared, and how are we to maintain them? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Do
If
you
I
want to
can,
start, Maria?
I can start a bit more from a design-oriented answer. I think what is very important to consider also with these types of ideas and catalogs, something that it was also mentioned before, while the solutions can be approached as a global idea, the actual making of its solution should be contextualized. So when we're talking about, for example, the sea level rise catalog, the ideas of the actual material should also be contextualized in its side, depending on how what type of context we have, we can adapt to similar materials that we see there. So that could be anything from wood to we have worked also with recycled plastic. It's really a big range of materials that can be defined on a case-by-case scenario. And while the idea can be one idea fits all, the actual implementation should be tailor-made to its site and its context.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe specifically for the city block I just presented, it's good to realize that we are talking about what we call the substructure. That's you could say the floating platform, and the superstructure that is what is on top of it. And the superstructure is how we designed it so far is a prefab, and if I'm correct, is a CLT. So it's wood, um, and therefore light, but also strong. And the substructure, so the floating construction, that's quite a different story, because that's more or less like comparable with a ship. And so because it's steel, and because the design is not for well, it can be used for an inland lake, but it is designed for coastal areas, and it can withstand waves like 6 to 7 meters. So it is really strong, but still it is, you could say, well, modular. And an important issue here, of course, is the more recyclable it is, the better. Uh, and the way it is being assembled, it is on a dry dock. And so again, it is more or less built like a ship, and it will be also maintained in that way. Of course, and that's what I saw also a question about the waves. It is
Yeah.
the impact, and of course there are a lot of coastal cities that do have, say, barrier islands, And then yeah, if there is a choice to do it between the barrier island and the mainland, that's always, of course, better than just out in the open ocean.
Mhm.
And I think, well, in the future, it will maybe the designs will be further developed and even capable to withstand even higher waves. But so far, it's already yeah, possible to withstand 6 to 7 meters. Yeah.
Wow, that's excellent to hear.
Yeah.
Maria, do you want to say a bit more about how adapting existing structures can make them withstand waves, cyclones, hurricanes, and the such?
Yeah, this is quite a technical question for me. I will try to reply based on the knowledge that I have also as an urban planner. What we do usually in this type of environments, we see this. We work together with experts on this type of technical elements that help us
Mhm.
guide our design. So if we're working in a hurricane-prone environment, we need to bring the experts with us to understand how we can actually make these structures and make them resilient to this type of weather events. But I think the main idea is that this structure, if we're talking about floating structures, is that we also try to adapt in the areas that these are placed. So maybe we don't put in a hurricane prone
Mhm.
maybe we don't do a heavy floating structure, but we focus more on a floatable landscape, on
Mhm.
giving more space on the ground floor that I was giving the examples before.
Yeah.
So instead of looking really on creating like a high rise on stilts that can be floating. Maybe in this case, we're looking more into the transformation of the existing structures, and actually in the examples that I was sharing, more towards living with floatable landscapes, almost like
Mm.
tidal landscape that the water can be higher and lower, where we say, okay, we need to retreat and we give space. We don't have any dangerous programming on the ground floor. So we can also see it on this type of approach
Mhm.
by having a range of solutions.
Yeah, it's context specific. And the
Exactly.
design, yeah, like you said before, the idea could be universal, but the implementation has to be very localized. There is a question around affordability of these solutions and if global south cities can access them. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and of course, I have to be honest about this. This is we are talking about a pilot,
Mhm.
and like the first cell phone was also quite expensive, and the more you can scale it, and the further you are in the development, it can become cheaper. And because that's at the end, of course, our goal to help the most vulnerable cities. But I think so far, uh, yeah, we also need to get this further developed. We need the
Mhm.
cities like the Singapores and the Vancouvers. And on the other hand, we also in the company where I work do have other floating systems that can be used for, you could say, less dense housing blocks, but more small scale. And these structures, this floating system is really useful for affordable houses. But also the large scale structure that I showed um, has to be developed towards that situation at the end, of course. Yeah.
Great. Maria?
Yeah, I think we can see it in two ways as well. I mean, there is, of course, the always the idea that, yeah, these are new solutions that are not used a lot, so they are always more expensive. But on the same time, we also need to think that there is a certain budget from cities, from developers. They are going to develop. There is a housing crisis, for example, in the Netherlands, in a lot of areas as well, and in other places in the world. But it's a question is, how do we use the budget that we already have into creating solutions and buildings and environments that they're flexible, that they can be adaptable, and that they can respond to the needs that they are the world will be facing in 50 years already, in 30 years already, tomorrow already. So we also need to consider that as well in terms of the affordability of these projects. So that's also why we need to work on this together and open the way that we're thinking in order to, we can start small and start building up. We can start with pilot projects, we can start with smaller interventions, but I think for all the future developments, the goal should be that we should think towards a change in future that will require different way of building and of thinking the cities as that we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Maybe a very short additional remark is that maybe because I'm just now thinking about my time in Rotterdam. So, for example, a floating farm or a floating pavilion, there was no urgency to really have a floating farm or a floating pavilion. But as a city, we thought we in the future, but also other cities in the future might need these solutions. So just let's start with it and show that it is possible to create awareness and see it from there. Yeah? So yeah, we are looking for cities that really want to innovate and to have the guts to try this out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a very interesting question in the Q&A around how people can also adapt to these structures, especially people who are used to living on solid ground, moving and living on not so solid ground, on water. There's seasickness. There's many things you have to adapt as well. What are your experiences with that or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question, of course. I I think it would be no problem at all. Again, I have been working on the floating pavilion and the floating office in Rotterdam, which is much smaller, and even during a heavy storm, it was hardly moving. And so, and of course, there might be extreme situations that is the case, but it is much more, you could say, stable compared to the smaller boathouses or yeah, or a floating villa. So it is a huge, massive, stable construction, and I think yeah, people look when you talk about real estate and value, and so most waterfront areas in cities have a higher value. So waterfront areas. It is also a quality, and I think because people often want a view on water, so I think it will not be hard for people that are used to live on the land, like all the people actually, to live on a construction like this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, in my experience so far, this I think connects a bit with a previous point that we made about community engagement. I think sometimes the representation and the graphics that we're using, and I also see it in our office as well with clients as well, that we try to really show how this could be like how can also public space on the water could look like, what type of engagement and uses can you have, how can you actually use it, and it if you really try to show that, so examples, or try to help people imagine this, It also gets much more positive response, and responses like, oh, I didn't think it can be like that. I didn't think that I could use it in that way, or it can be accessible in that way. So that helps to change also the perception of what it is to live on the water, live with the water, live on tidal landscapes, that then maybe they change from day to day. That also helps the public and the communities to understand what this could be like.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that. We have way more questions, but we do have to wrap up as we're running out of time. Maybe I can hand over to both of you, maybe in 30 seconds or so. If there's anything you want to say to wrap up this conversation, please let us know. And also, all the information shared today will be shared with the audience. So if you want to ask more questions, you can also take it offline. But hand over to you, Maria. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I want to first of all, I want to thank you again, and I want to thank also everyone who joined, and thank you for your questions and for your excitement. I think what I want to reflect back here is something that I mentioned in my presentation as well, that there is a lot of knowledge out there. There is a lot of innovators out there who are thinking towards this equitable and resilient future. So what we believe here in MVRDV is that it's really possible to start thinking and designing like that. We have the knowledge, we just need to sit together on a table. We need to interact more with each other, and also through the different professions as well. We think outside our bubble and communicate outside our professional bubble as well. So I want to just let everyone think on that, and hopefully we could go together towards a more resilient future.
Excellent. Thank you. Arnoud?
Yeah, well, very short. Of course, thank to you and your colleagues for organizing this and inviting us. Uh, I think, Maria, it makes sense that we also have a meeting together, because I think we are quite complementary to each other.
Yes.
And yeah, and of course, when people their questions are not answered, just please reach out to me, and then I think Fitsum can share our contact information. And well, finally, I hope the awareness will grow also amongst cities and developers, that there is a need, of course, and an urgency to invest in climate resilience, how to become adaptive, but you can combine adaptiveness and attractiveness. So that was also our motto in Rotterdam. We want to become adaptive and attractive at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maria and Arnoud. And also thank you to the audience for such an engaged conversation today. Please watch our website for the session recordings, materials, and summary, and of course, the contacts of our panelists today. Also, stay tuned for our next session, which is on leveraging digital public goods for urban resilience, which will take place on the 27th of March. You'll find a link to register in the chat for that. And with that, I will say thank you, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and speak soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
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 Ciao.
See you.